The most enduring stories are often those without an ending. They are the questions carved into the landscape, whispered by one generation to the next, not as fact, but as legend. History is written by the victors, they say, but it is haunted by the lost, the voices that were silenced too soon, under circumstances too strange to forget and too cold ever to solve. This is a journey into that haunting, across time and county lines, into woods and along riverbanks, where the past's deepest secrets washed up or were wedged into darkness, waiting to be found. These are the tales where the official record ends with a shrug, but the human imagination, that relentless detective, never clocks off. We begin, not with a bang, but with a discovery so quiet, so bizarre, it seems ripped from the pages of a fairy tale gone terribly wrong. Spring, 1943. While the world tears itself apart in the greatest conflict humanity has ever known, the village of Wrexham in North Wales exists in a strange pocket of peace. Yes, there are rationing queues. Yes, there are nights spent in Anderson shelters, listening to the drone of German bombers heading toward Liverpool. But in the ancient woodland of Coed y Brain, the wood of the hills, there is still room for children to be children. The war has brought changes even here. Evacuees from the bombed cities of the Northwest have swelled the local schools. Soldiers train in the nearby fields. But the woods remain timeless, unchanged for centuries. The oaks here were already ancient when Henry VIII broke with Rome. They have witnessed plague and fire, rebellion and restoration. They would witness one more secret. But what those two boys would find that spring morning would haunt this village for generations. Their names were William Jones and Thomas Davies, 12 and 13 years old, best friends who spent every free moment in these woods, building forts, hunting for rabbit warrens, imagining themselves as commandos behind enemy lines. On this particular morning in late April, they were drawn to a tree they'd passed hundreds of times before. A giant oak, its trunk so wide 3 men couldn't link hands around it. But age had been cruel. The heartwood had rotted away, leaving a dark cavity at its base, a natural hiding place that seemed to call to them. Thomas went first. He crouched low and peered into the darkness, waiting for his eyes to adjust. Later, he would tell the police he thought at first it was a dead sheep, perhaps a fox. But as his vision cleared, he saw the curve of what could only be a human skull, grinning up at him from the leaf litter. The boys ran. They ran all the way to the village constable's house, breathless, convinced they'd stumbled upon a victim of German spies or saboteurs. They had found a victim, certainly, but the enemy was far more intimate and far more human. What the police found inside that tree would launch one of Britain's most baffling murder investigations, a case that remains unsolved to this day. Within hours, Coed y Brain was swarming with police. The Home Office pathologist, Dr. Gerald Evans, was summoned from Liverpool. A forensic photographer documented every angle. The skeleton was carefully extracted, each bone logged and examined. Dr. Evans worked through the night. His report, filed 3 days later, painted a portrait from bones. Female. Age between 30 and 40. Height approximately 5 feet 2 inches. Small frame. Evidence of malnutrition during life. Severe dental decay. At least 8 teeth lost ante-mortem. Time since death, approximately 5 to 8 years, likely between 1935 and 1938. Cause of death here, Dr. Evans paused. There were no fractures to the skull, no knife marks on the ribs, no bullet holes. But coiled near the cervical vertebrae was a length of coarse rope, and the hyoid bone, that delicate horseshoe at the throat, showed signs of trauma. Strangulation. Almost certainly strangulation. But who was she? Her clothing had mostly rotted away, but fragments remained, a cheap felt hat of a style common in the early 1930s, a piece of taffeta that might have been a dress or undergarment, most tellingly, the Hessian sacking that had been wrapped around her, the kind used for potatoes or grain, available at any farm. And there was the rope, not silk or clothesline, but the thick tarred rope used for securing loads on carts or boats. The police circulated her description to every force in Britain. They checked missing persons reports going back a decade. They interviewed every farmer, shopkeeper, and publican within 20 miles. Nothing. Not a single match. Not one woman of her description reported missing from the local area. It was as if she had materialized in that tree from nowhere, a ghost before she was even dead. The breakthrough would come from an unexpected source, a memory from 8 years earlier that would point to a well-dressed stranger and a terrible secret. Before we continue with the investigation, we must understand the tree itself. In Welsh folklore, oak trees are liminal spaces, thresholds between the world of the living and the world of spirits. They are homes to the Tylwyth Teg, the fair folk. To cut one down without permission is to invite catastrophe. This particular oak had stood for perhaps 400 years. Local records show it was already considered the old oak in 1785. Children had played in its hollow for generations. Lovers carved initials into its bark. In the 19th century, it had been used as a hiding spot during poaching expeditions. Gamekeepers wouldn't look inside for fear of disturbing nesting owls. But there were older stories, too. Stories that would resurface after 1943 with new, sinister weight. Old Gareth Thomas, who was 90 in 1943, remembered his grandmother telling him to stay away from that tree. She said it was where bad things slept. In the 1880s, a vagrant had been found dead inside it. Natural causes, the inquest said, but the locals whispered about a curse. And now, this. A woman, deliberately placed, hidden in the dark womb of the tree like some terrible secret the wood itself was keeping. The discovery changed the tree. Children no longer played there. Courting couples found other spots. It became a place of dread. And it was about to become something else. The center of a legend that would outlive everyone who investigated the crime. Because the police were about to hear a story that would transform this from a local mystery into something far more sinister. A story of a stranger from the city and a woman who arrived one night and was never seen leaving. 6 weeks into the investigation, with leads evaporating like morning mist, Detective Inspector Robert Morris received a telephone call that would change everything. The caller was hesitant, apologetic. His name was Evan Hughes, a farm laborer in his 50s. He'd been following the case in the newspapers, and something had been nagging at him. A memory. He wasn't sure if it was relevant, but Morris drove out to Hughes's cottage that same afternoon. Hughes's story spilled out slowly, carefully, as if he were reconstructing something from fragments. It was the summer of 1935. No, maybe late spring of 36. He couldn't be certain of the year, but he was working at Plas Uchaf, a farmhouse about 2 miles from Coed y Brain. The farm took in occasional paying guests, travelers needing a night's accommodation in the countryside. One evening, just as dusk was falling, a man arrived in a motor car. This was unusual enough. Few locals owned cars. He was well dressed, Hughes remembered. City clothes. A good coat. He had an accent from the northwest, Liverpool, Hughes thought, or perhaps Birkenhead. With the man was a woman. She was, Hughes recalled, not dressed in the same manner. Her coat was thin and patched, her shoes worn. She seemed nervous. Hughes used the word agitated and unwell. She barely spoke. Let the man do all the talking. They took a room for the night. The next morning, they left early. Hughes saw them drive off. He thought nothing more of it. But 3, perhaps 4 days later, the man came back, alone. What the farm laborer witnessed next would become the most chilling piece of evidence in the entire investigation. The man arrived in the afternoon this time. He was in a hurry, brusque. He claimed he'd left something behind in the room and needed to retrieve it. The farmer's wife let him in. He was upstairs for perhaps 20 minutes. When he came down, Hughes, who was working in the yard, saw something that lodged in his memory like a splinter. The man was carrying a bundle, large, awkward, wrapped in what looked like sacking. He struggled with the weight of it as he carried it to his car. At the time, Hughes assumed it was possessions the couple had left behind, perhaps tools or farm equipment they'd brought for some reason. It seemed odd, but not sinister. The man placed the bundle in the boot of his car, nodded curtly to Hughes, and drove away. That direction, toward the woods. Hughes never saw him again. And until he read about the skeleton in the tree, he'd never connected the two events. But now, sitting across from DeMorris, the pieces assembled into a horrific narrative, a man brings a woman to a remote farmhouse. Days later, he returns alone with a heavy bundle wrapped in sacking, the same kind of sacking found with the skeleton. The timeline fit. The location fit. The details fit. The police now had their theory. The killer was from Liverpool. He had access to a car. He had brought his victim to rural Wales specifically to dispose of her in a place where she'd never be found. The question was, who was he? And who was she? The investigation would now turn to the dark streets of Liverpool, where secrets ran as deep as the Mersey, but finding a nameless killer in a city of nearly 1 million would prove almost impossible. To understand the challenge facing the police, we must enter the world of Liverpool in the mid-1930s. It was a city of stark contrasts. Grand Georgian townhouses overlooked the Mersey, built on the wealth of empire and trade. But behind those facades lay streets of grinding poverty. The infamous court dwellings where entire families lived in single rooms, sharing water pumps and outdoor privies with dozens of others. The Great Depression had hit Liverpool's docks hard. Unemployment was over 30%. Desperation bred crime, theft, prostitution, domestic violence. The police were overwhelmed. And crucially, people moved through Liverpool constantly, sailors from every nation, migrants seeking work, women fleeing bad situations in Ireland or rural Wales. People disappeared all the time, by choice or by force, and no one reported them missing, because no one knew they existed. The Liverpool City Police received DeMorris's inquiry with little hope. A well-dressed man with a car who may have murdered a woman 8 years ago? With no name, no photograph, no concrete details? They tried. They cross-referenced missing persons with the skeleton's description. They interviewed car owners from the wealthier districts. They visited hospitals, asylums, and workhouses, looking for women who had disappeared between 1935 and 1938. One lead seemed promising. A woman named Margaret Murphy had been reported missing by her sister in October 1935. She was the right age, the right build. She'd last been seen with a man her sister didn't know, a gentleman type, the sister said. Police tracked down Margaret's dental records. Dr. Evans compared them to the skeleton. Not a match. Margaret Murphy's teeth had been in good condition. The skeleton's teeth showed years of neglect. Lead after lead crumbled. The man from the farmhouse remained a ghost. The woman in the tree remained nameless. By the winter of 1943, the investigation was, for all practical purposes, over. But the story was far from over, because without closure, without answers, The human mind creates its own. And the legend of the lady in the tree was about to begin. In the absence of facts, theories rushed in like water filling a void. Theory 1. The illegal abortion. In 1930s Britain, abortion was a crime punishable by life imprisonment. Yet desperate women sought them in back alleys and private rooms, from doctors struck off the register, and from amateurs with no training at all. Had the woman in the tree died during a botched procedure? Had the man from Liverpool been the abortionist, panicking when his patient died on his table? The strangulation didn't fit this theory perfectly, but perhaps he'd killed her when she began screaming, drawing attention. It would explain why she was never reported missing. Women seeking illegal abortions told no one where they were going. Theory 2. The escaped wife. Perhaps she was fleeing an abusive marriage. The man from Liverpool was supposed to help her start a new life, but instead, he murdered her. Perhaps for her money, or in a crime of passion, or because she knew something about him he couldn't allow to be revealed. The poor state of her teeth and clothing suggested a life of hardship, consistent with a woman trapped in poverty, desperate enough to trust a stranger promising escape. Theory 3. Something darker still. Human trafficking was not a term used in 1940s Britain, but the practice existed. Women and girls were lured with promises of employment, domestic service, factory work, only to find themselves trapped in brothels or exploitative situations. Had she been such a victim? Had she tried to escape and been silenced? The police officially favored no particular theory. The file was marked undetected murder and shelved, but in the pubs and parlors of Wrexham, the theories grew more elaborate, more gothic. The woman became a German spy, a duchess in hiding, a witch who had cursed her own killer, and the tree, that ancient oak, became her monument. Because sometimes, when the law cannot provide justice, folklore steps in to provide meaning. And the transformation of the lady in the tree from victim to legend says as much about us as it does about her. By the 1950s, the lady in the tree had become a proper ghost story. Courting couples walking near Coed Y Brain after dark reported hearing sobbing coming from the direction of the oak. Hunters claimed their dogs would refuse to approach the tree, whining and pulling away. A local school teacher collected the various accounts in 1962 for a book on Welsh folklore. The stories had evolved. Now the lady was seen as well as heard, a pale figure in a rotted dress, reaching out from the hollow of the tree. Some said she was searching for her killer. Others said she was warning young women to beware of strangers. In the 1970s, when paranormal investigation became fashionable, groups with tape recorders and electromagnetic field detectors spent nights at the tree. They claimed to capture EVP, electronic voice phenomena, whispered words in Welsh and English, "Help me. Remember." His name. Skeptics pointed out the tree was near a road. Any sounds could be traffic or distant voices. But belief, once established, is hard to dislodge. The tree itself aged. By the 1990s, it was dying, the cavity wider, the crown sparse. The local council debated cutting it down. It was dangerous, unstable. But public outcry stopped them. The lady's tree had become heritage. To remove it felt like erasing her entirely. In 2008, the tree finally fell during a winter storm. The local historical society recovered pieces of the trunk and placed them in the Wrexham Museum, along with a plaque telling her story. She was given a proper burial in 1943 in the churchyard of St. Mary's in Wrexham. Her grave marker reads simply, "Unknown woman. Found April 1943. May she rest in peace. Fresh flowers still appear there, left by strangers who have heard her story and feel compelled to honor a woman no one could name. She is remembered. But she is not solved. The lady in the tree is not Britain's only unidentified victim, because just 17 years after her discovery, another body would be found, this time not hidden in the embrace of wood, but delivered by water. And this case would be even more bizarre. The River Severn is Britain's longest river, stretching 220 miles from the Welsh Mountains to the Bristol Channel. It is ancient, powerful, and treacherous. Its tidal bore, a wall of water driven upriver by the incoming tide, can reach heights of over 6 feet, a phenomenon the Romans recorded with awe and fear. For millennia, the Severn has been a highway of commerce and culture, but it has also been a keeper of secrets. Bodies have always washed up on its banks. Suicides, mostly, the desperate walking into the water at Gloucester or Worcester, their remains found days later, miles downstream. Accidents, too, fishermen swept away, children who ventured too close. But in February 1960, the Severn delivered something different. George Wilkins was a fisherman, had been all his life, as had his father and grandfather before him. He worked the stretch of river near Stonebench in Gloucestershire, checking eel traps and nets. It was a cold morning, mist rising off the water, the tide low. The bank was littered with the usual debris, driftwood, plastic bottles, a bicycle tire, and something else. A parcel, wrapped tightly in oilskin and bound with heavy cord. Waterlogged, heavy, clearly having been in the river for some time. Wilkins was a practical man. His first thought was smuggled goods, perhaps cigarettes or whiskey, a package fallen from a boat. He dragged it up onto the bank and began to unwrap it. The oilskin peeled away to reveal layers of burlap sacking, also bound with cord. Wilkins cut through the first layer. And then he stepped back, hands shaking, and went to find a telephone. What was inside that package would horrify a nation and launch one of the most bizarre murder investigations in British history. The case of the man with the manicured toes. By early afternoon, the riverbank at Stonebench looked like a military operation. Police from Gloucestershire Constabulary, Home Office pathologist Dr. Ian Pearce, forensic photographers, a detective superintendent from Scotland Yard's murder squad, sent because the local force requested assistance. The package was carefully transported to the mortuary at Gloucester Royal Infirmary. There, under harsh electric lights, Dr. Pearce completed the unwrapping. Inside was a human torso, male, severed cleanly at the shoulders and hips. No head, no arms, no legs. The cuts, Dr. Pearce noted in his report, were professional. Made at the joints with a sharp, heavy blade, possibly a surgical saw or a butcher's cleaver. Whoever had done this knew anatomy. The shoulder joints had been disarticulated, not hacked through. The hip joints the same. This was not the frenzied work of an amateur. This was methodical, intentional. The torso itself told a story, male, aged between 40 and 50. Height, estimated from the length of the spine, approximately 5 feet 8 inches. Well-nourished, not rich, perhaps, but not poor. Muscles developed, suggesting a life of physical activity. A small scar on the abdomen consistent with an appendectomy, performed years earlier. Time since death, recent, perhaps 1 to 2 weeks. Cause of death, impossible to determine without the head and neck. But there were no obvious injuries to the torso itself. No stab wounds, no bullet holes. The wrapping was examined. The oilskin was of a type used by builders and fishermen, available in any hardware shop. The cord was common hemp rope. The burlap sacking was unremarkable. There were no identifying marks, no tattoos, no scars beyond the appendectomy. And then, the detail that would make this case infamous. His toenails, all 10 of them, carefully trimmed, filed smooth, and coated with a clear, colorless varnish. In the rigidly masculine Britain of 1960, this detail was more than unusual. It was shocking. And it would become the key to the entire investigation. The newspapers seized on it immediately. The Man with the Manicured Toes, the Daily Mirror. Severn torso, the mystery of the polished nails, the Manchester Guardian. Who was the vain victim? The Sun. It became a sensation. In 1960, male grooming beyond basic hygiene was viewed with suspicion. A man who polished his toenails was either extraordinarily vain, involved in a profession that required it, or, the newspapers hinted heavily, of a certain type. The police, to their credit, pursued all angles professionally. They contacted theatrical agencies. Did any dancers or actors fit the description? Were any missing? They reached out to athletic organizations. Boxers and wrestlers were known to care for their feet meticulously. Had any failed to show up for recent matches? They consulted chiropodists and podiatrists. Was this a medical practice? Treatment for a foot condition that required keeping nails smooth and sealed? They quietly investigated the underground gay community, particularly in London and Manchester. Was this a cultural practice within certain circles? Every lead dead ended. No missing dancers. No absent boxers. Podiatrists said this wasn't a medical treatment they recognized. And contacts in the gay community, who spoke only on condition of anonymity, at risk of arrest, said polished toenails were not a common practice. The truth, almost certainly, is more mundane. It was a personal quirk. Perhaps he had a job that required closed shoes and wanted to prevent toenail problems. Perhaps it was a vanity so private he told no one about it. Perhaps a lover had requested it. But that quirk, that tiny, intimate detail, made him no less anonymous. In fact, it made him more mysterious. Because whoever killed him had removed every identifying feature except this one. Had they not noticed? Or had they left it deliberately, as a taunt? The investigation was about to focus on one man, a respected doctor with surgical training who had suddenly left the country. But proving he was the killer without knowing the victim's identity would prove impossible. 3 months into the investigation, with public interest fading and leads exhausted, Detective Superintendent Harold Webb received an anonymous letter. It was postmarked from Gloucester, written in block capitals on plain paper. Look into Dr. Michael Lawson. He left for Canada just after the body was found. He knows things about men. He has a surgery room. Anonymous tips are common in high-profile cases. Most lead nowhere, driven by grudges or imagination. But Webb had learned to follow every thread, no matter how thin. Dr. Michael Lawson was a general practitioner with a surgery in Stroud, about 15 miles from Stonebench. He was 48 years old, unmarried, well-regarded in the community, and, Webb discovered, he had indeed emigrated to Canada in late February 1960, just days after the torso was discovered. Webb pulled Lawson's file. His medical training included surgical rotations. He would have the knowledge and skill to disarticulate a body cleanly. He had access to surgical instruments. And there were rumors. Nothing provable, nothing official. But whispers in the Stroud pubs that Dr. Lawson had particular friends, that he'd been seen with men in circumstances that were odd, that he'd treated certain conditions that weren't talked about in polite society. In 1960, homosexuality was still a crime in Britain. Police investigated these rumors carefully, but found nothing concrete, no arrests, no complaints, no scandals. Webb contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Dr. Lawson was living in Vancouver, working in a clinic. Would they be willing to interview him regarding a murder inquiry? The RCMP agreed. In June 1960, 2 officers knocked on Dr. Lawson's door. The interview lasted 3 hours. Lawson was cooperative, even eager to help. Yes, he'd left England suddenly, but it was for a job opportunity, not to flee justice. He'd been planning the move for months. The timing was coincidental. Did he know anything about the severed torso? Only what he'd read in the papers before he left. Had he ever treated a man matching the victim's description? Impossible to say without a name or face. He'd treated hundreds of patients. Did he have surgical training? Yes, but so did thousands of doctors. The RCMP's report was clear. No evidence of wrongdoing. Lawson was polite, consistent, and his alibi for the likely time of death, he'd been seeing patients, verifiable through appointment books, was solid. Without a victim's name, there was no case. The investigation could go no further. Webb made one more attempt. He had photographs of the torso's surgical cuts sent to medical experts. Could they identify the style, the training, the specific technique? The response was unanimous, competent, but unremarkable. Could have been done by any of thousands of medical professionals or skilled butchers in Britain. By the end of 1960, the file on the severed torso was marked Undetected Murder and archived. Dr. Michael Lawson lived in Canada until his death in 1989. He never returned to Britain. His obituary made no mention of the investigation. Did he do it? We will never know. The circumstantial evidence is suggestive, but far from conclusive. And there is a very real possibility that the anonymous letter was motivated not by knowledge of guilt, but by prejudice. Someone who suspected Lawson of being gay and wanted to destroy him. The severed torso man was buried in a pauper's grave in Gloucester. His headstone reads, Unknown Man, February 1960. Rest in peace. Like the lady in the tree, he is remembered. But he is not known. These 2 cases are not isolated tragedies. They are part of a darker pattern that runs through British history. A pattern of victims who vanish into mystery and killers who vanish into time. Let us step back in time to the Essex village of Wychan Bonhunt in the autumn of 1875. Mary Hawking was 71 years old, a spinster who lived alone in a small cottage on the village edge. She was, by all accounts, a difficult woman, argumentative, suspicious of her neighbors, a recluse who ventured into the village only for church and essential supplies. But she was not poor. Local rumor held that she had money, quite a lot of it, hidden somewhere in her cottage. Money left by her parents or saved from a lifetime of frugality. No one knew for certain, but everyone speculated. On the morning of October 15th, the postman noticed Mary's door was ajar. This was unusual. Mary was obsessive about keeping her home locked. He called out. No response. He pushed the door open. Mary Hawking lay on her kitchen floor in a pool of congealed blood. She had been beaten to death with savage brutality, her skull fractured in multiple places, her arms broken as she tried to defend herself. The poker from her fireplace lay beside her, bent and bloodied. The cottage had been ransacked, drawers emptied, floorboards pried up, mattresses slashed. But here's the crucial detail. In plain sight on the kitchen table sat a small wooden box containing 47 in notes and coins, a fortune for a rural spinster. The killer had left the money untouched. The police investigation focused on 2 suspects. First, a traveling tinker who had been seen in the area days before. He was known to the police, petty theft, vagrancy. He had no alibi for the night of the murder, But when arrested, he was penniless. If he'd killed for money, where was it? And why leave 47 on the table? Second, Mary's own nephew, Thomas Hocking, who stood to inherit what little she had. He'd visited her the week before, and witnesses said the meeting had been heated. But Thomas had a solid alibi. He'd been working at a farm 10 miles away, with multiple witnesses. A coroner's inquest returned a verdict of willful murder by person or persons unknown. No one was ever charged. The case became local legend. The story evolved. Now the killer was a supernatural entity, a demon who killed not for money, but for the pleasure of violence. Mary's ghost was said to haunt the cottage, reliving her final, terrified moments. The cottage stood empty for decades. No one would live in it. It was finally demolished in 1932. But the question remains, if not robbery, then what? Was this a personal grudge? A revenge killing where money was irrelevant? Or did the killer panic, flee, before taking what they came for? We will never know. Mary Hocking's killer walked free, and the truth died with her on that October morning. From England to Scotland, another case. This time, a miscarriage of justice so profound that even today, historians cannot agree on what really happened. Glasgow, July 1862. The city is at the height of its industrial power. Shipyards, factories, grand Victorian architecture rising above the soot and grime. In a respectable townhouse on Sandyford Place, a wealthy accountant named John Fleming lives with his family and 2 servants. One is Jessie McPherson, a sturdy, reliable young woman of 27 who has worked for the family for years. On the morning of July 5th, the Flemings return from a weekend away. They find Jessie in the basement servants' quarters, brutally murdered. She has been struck at least 40 times with a cleaver. The violence is excessive, frenzied. Blood covers the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The police investigation is, from the beginning, a disaster. The crime scene is contaminated. Family members and neighbors trample through before evidence can be collected. The murder weapon, a meat cleaver from the kitchen, is handled by multiple people. And then, the investigation takes a bizarre turn. The police, under pressure to solve this high-profile case, consult a spiritualist medium. She conducts a séance and claims to have contacted Jessie's spirit. According to the medium, Jessie names her killer, John Watson, the elderly male servant who also worked in the household. On the basis of this spirit testimony, along with thin circumstantial evidence, a blood stain on Watson's shirt that may or may not be human blood, John Watson is arrested, tried, and convicted of murder. He is sentenced to death. But the case causes a public uproar. The evidence is laughably weak. The reliance on a medium is absurd. The conviction is appealed, and eventually commuted to life imprisonment. Watson serves 15 years before being released. He dies penniless, still protesting his innocence. Modern historians who have examined the case are divided. Some believe Watson was guilty, that the circumstantial evidence, while weak, points to him. Others believe the real killer was John Fleming himself, or even Fleming's son. Both had access to the house, both had opportunity, and there were hints, never explored by police, of improper conduct between Fleming and Jessie. The truth? We cannot know. The investigation was so botched, so compromised by sensationalism and prejudice, that the real events of that July night are lost forever. What we do know is this: Jessie McPherson died violently. Someone in that house killed her. And justice, if it was done at all, was done for the wrong reasons, in the wrong way. She is buried in Glasgow's necropolis, her grave marked with a stone paid for by public subscription. It reads, Jessie McPherson. Cruelly murdered. Justice yet undone. From Victorian Britain to mid-century America, the pattern continues, but this case is perhaps the most haunting of all, because the victim was a child, and no one ever claimed him. February 25, 1957. A young man is checking his muskrat traps along Susquehanna Road in the Fox Chase neighborhood of Philadelphia. The area is semi-rural, a patchwork of woods and fields on the city's edge. He sees a cardboard box lying in a thicket, about 15 feet from the road. It's a JCPenney bassinet box, large and sturdy. He assumes it's been dumped, maybe contains something valuable. He doesn't open it, not then. But the image nags at him. Days later, he returns with a friend. They open the box. Inside is the body of a boy. He is naked, wrapped in a plaid blanket. He has been dead for some time. The coroner will later estimate several days to a week. He is perhaps 4 or 5 years old, with brown hair that has been recently, crudely cut. The autopsy reveals a life of profound suffering. The boy is malnourished, his body covered in old scars and bruises. He has been beaten regularly, over a long period. His hair was cut shortly before death, possibly to change his appearance. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. But who was he? The police launch one of the most intensive investigations in Philadelphia history. The boy's fingerprints are taken and checked against every missing child report in the country. His photograph is circulated nationwide. Detectives visit every school, orphanage, and foster home within 100 miles. Nothing. Not a single match. No one reports him missing. The box is traced. It was sold at a JCPenney in Philadelphia, but hundreds were sold. There's no way to narrow it down. The blanket is common, mass-produced. His clothing, wherever it is, was never found. A medical examiner creates a plaster reconstruction of the boy's face, making him look as if he's merely sleeping. This image is printed in newspapers, shown on television news. Do you know this child? The caption pleads. He was the child of undocumented immigrants, afraid to come forward. He was from a traveling family, circus workers, carnival people, who moved on before anyone realized he was gone. He was the victim of a child abuse ring, killed and discarded by people who knew no one would miss him. In the 1990s, a woman named M comes forward with a story. She claims she knew the boy's identity, that he had been purchased from his biological parents by a woman named Martha, who abused him and eventually killed him in a fit of rage. Police investigate extensively. But M's story has inconsistencies. Leads based on her information go nowhere. It's never confirmed. In 1998, the boy is finally given a name, not his real name, but a memorial. America's Unknown Child. He is buried in a Philadelphia cemetery, his grave marker bearing that title. In 2019, genetic genealogy techniques were applied to DNA extracted from his remains. The technology that has solved decades-old cases might, finally, give him his name back. But as of now, he remains unknown. What makes this case particularly haunting is not just the violence of his death, but the silence surrounding his life. Somewhere, someone knows who he was. A mother, a father, a sibling. Someone saw this little boy every day, and then one day he was gone, and they said nothing. That silence, that void where a name and a story should be, is its own kind of horror. These cases share a common thread, but understanding why some cases go cold while others are solved requires looking at the machinery of investigation itself. What transforms a murder into a mystery? Why do some cases resolve in days, while others remain unsolved for decades or forever? The answer lies in a combination of factors, some practical, some almost philosophical. The single most important element in solving a murder is knowing who the victim is. If you know the victim, you can trace their last movements, identify their associates, understand their conflicts. The vast majority of murders are committed by someone the victim knew, a family member, friend, romantic partner. But if the victim is anonymous, the investigation has no starting point. Every lead is speculative. Without a name, there are no witnesses, no relationships to explore, no motive to uncover. Evidence degrades. Memories fade. Witnesses die. The longer a case remains open, the colder the trail becomes. In 1943, forensic science was rudimentary. No DNA analysis. No computerized databases. Fingerprints were useful only if you had a suspect to match them against. A woman hidden in a tree for 8 years had no fingerprints left. By 1960, things had improved, but not dramatically. The severed torso investigation had better forensic tools, but still lacked the victim's identity. Without that, even the best detective work leads nowhere. Before computerized national databases, police forces were isolated. A woman missing in Liverpool might be an unidentified body in Wales, but the two forces might never make the connection. Jurisdictional boundaries created blind spots. A killer who transported a victim across county lines could exploit these gaps, knowing one force wouldn't communicate with another. The victims most likely to remain unidentified are those on society's margins: the poor, the transient, sex workers, the homeless, illegal immigrants, those fleeing abuse. These are people whose disappearances might not be reported, who have no dental records, no fingerprints on file, who moved through life leaving minimal traces. The lady in the tree's poor teeth and worn clothing suggests such a life. The severed torso man, despite being well-nourished, might have been someone living a secret life. Gay, perhaps, in an era when being open meant prison. And finally, there's chance. The random luck that determines whether a witness comes forward, whether a piece of evidence is overlooked, whether a detective makes an intuitive leap that proves correct. Some cases are solved by brilliant detective work, others by dumb luck. And some remain unsolved not because they're unsolvable, but because the right piece of luck never arrived. But in our modern age, science offers new hope. The dead, it turns out, can still speak, if we know how to listen. In 1984, British scientist Alec Jeffreys made a discovery that would revolutionize criminal justice: DNA profiling. For the first time, a person's unique genetic code could be extracted from biological samples, blood, hair, semen, even saliva on a cigarette butt, and used to identify them with near-perfect accuracy. By the 1990s, DNA databases allowed police to match crime scene samples against millions of profiles. Cold cases from the 1970s and 80s were suddenly solvable. Rapists and killers who thought they'd gotten away were arrested decades later. But DNA has a limitation. It only works if you have something to match it against. A DNA profile from a crime scene is useless unless the perpetrator's DNA is in a database, or you have a suspect to test. Then came the next revolution: genetic genealogy. In the 2000s, companies like Ancestry.com and 23andMe began offering consumer DNA testing. Millions of people sent in saliva samples to learn about their heritage. They uploaded their DNA profiles to public databases, hoping to find distant cousins and trace family trees. Investigators realized, we can use these databases. If you have DNA from an unidentified victim, you can search these public databases for relatives, second cousins, third cousins, people who share portions of that victim's genetic code. Then, using genealogical records, You can build family trees backward and forward, narrowing down possible identities. This technique has been revolutionary. In 2018, it was used to identify the Golden State Killer, a serial rapist and murderer who had evaded capture for decades. Since then, it's been used to identify dozens of unidentified victims and solve cold cases. Could it work for the lady in the tree and the severed torso? In theory, yes. Both bodies were buried, and DNA can potentially be extracted from bone. The lady in the tree's remains are in St. Mary's Churchyard in Wrexham. The severed torso man is in Gloucester. The challenge is time. Na degrades, especially in damp conditions. The lady has been in the ground for over 80 years, the severed torso for over 60. Extraction might be impossible. But even if DNA can be obtained, the next challenge is finding matches in genealogical databases. These databases are predominantly white and from English-speaking countries. If the victims had no descendants who took Na tests, or if their family lines died out, there will be no matches. Still, the possibility exists. In 2021, Gloucestershire Police announced they were reviewing the severed torso case with modern forensic techniques. As of now, no results have been made public. The lady in the tree has not yet been the subject of such an effort, but advocacy groups for unidentified victims have petitioned for it. The dead may yet speak. The question is whether we are willing to listen, and whether their voices can still reach us across the decades. But even if science gives them back their names, will we ever know the full story? Because some truths are not written in DNA, but in the silences people choose to keep. Why do we turn mysteries into myths? The psychological answer is simple. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We are deeply uncomfortable with randomness, with meaninglessness. A murder without a resolution is a story without an ending, and our minds rebel against that. So we create endings. We construct narratives that satisfy our need for meaning, even if they're not true. The lady in the tree becomes a tragic heroine, a woman fleeing abuse, or a victim of war, or a ghost seeking justice. These narratives give her agency and dignity she may not have had in life. They transform her from a victim of banal violence into a figure of legend. The severed torso man becomes a mystery of identity, the man with the secret, the hidden life, the forbidden love. His manicured toes are not just a personal quirk, but a clue to a deeper story of taboo and concealment. This is the function of folklore. It takes the raw, incomprehensible data of reality and shapes it into something we can understand. It provides moral lessons. Beware of strangers. Trust your instincts. Justice will come even if slowly. But there's a cost. The real people, the actual victims, with their mundane, painful truths, get lost beneath the layers of story. The woman in the tree might have been killed for a reason as simple and ugly as money, or a pregnancy, or because she witnessed something she shouldn't have. The man in the river might have been a traveling salesman killed for his wallet. These truths are not poetic. They don't satisfy. So we replace them with better stories. And yet, perhaps there's value in the folklore. Because it ensures we remember. The legal system forgets. Files are archived, cases closed, detectives retire. But folklore persists. It keeps these victims alive in cultural memory. The lady in the tree has flowers on her grave 80 years later because folklore made her immortal. The severed torso man is still talked about in Gloucestershire pubs because the story of the manicured toes is too strange to forget. They have been denied justice, but they have not been denied remembrance. And sometimes, remembrance is its own form of justice. But who were they really? Beneath the legend, beneath the mystery, there were two human beings who lived and loved and suffered. Let us try, One last time, to imagine their stories, let us imagine her. She is born in 1903, perhaps in Liverpool, perhaps in rural Wales. Her father works the docks or farms a small plot. There is never quite enough money. She leaves school at 12 to work in a factory or as a domestic servant. By 17, she is engaged, not to a man she loves, but to one who offers stability. By 20, she is married. By 25, she has buried 2 children in infancy. This is not unusual, it is the texture of working-class life. Her husband drinks. Perhaps he is violent. Perhaps he is simply absent, emotionally or physically. She learns to make herself small, to avoid attention, to survive. By her early 30s, she is worn. Her teeth are bad, she cannot afford a dentist. Her clothes are mended and remended. She looks older than her years. And then someone offers her a way out. A man, well-dressed, articulate, kind. He tells her he can help her. A new start, a job in the countryside, away from the city, away from her husband. She will be safe. She believes him. They travel together. He takes her to a farmhouse. It's beautiful, peaceful. She allows herself, for the first time in years, to hope. And then, the moment turns. Perhaps he demands something she won't give. Perhaps she realizes his intentions are not what she thought. Perhaps she threatens to expose him, to go to the police. He kills her. Quickly, efficiently. The rope is there, farm rope, common as dirt. He doesn't panic. He wraps her in sacking and carries her to the woods. He finds the hollow tree, and he places her inside, where the darkness will keep her. She dies believing no one will remember her. That she was so insignificant, her absence won't even be noted. She is wrong. 80 years later, we are still trying to find her name. But we can give her this. We remember that she existed, that her life, however hard, mattered, that she deserved better than the death she received, and the anonymity that followed. We remember you, even without your name. And the man from the river, who was he? What life did he lead before it ended in such a grotesque, calculated manner? Let us imagine him. He is born in 1915, perhaps. He survives the deprivations of the Great Depression, serves in the war. He returns to Britain in 1945, one of millions trying to rebuild a life in the ruins. He works, perhaps as a clerk, a shopkeeper, a tradesman. He is not wealthy but comfortable. He takes care of himself. Those manicured toenails are a small vanity, a way of maintaining dignity in a world that often strips it away. But he has a secret. Perhaps he is gay, living in constant fear of exposure and imprisonment. Perhaps he is involved in something illegal, gambling, black market goods, something that puts him in contact with dangerous people. Or perhaps his secret is simpler, an affair, a debt, a grudge. In February 1960, the secret catches up to him. Maybe he is lured to a meeting. Maybe he is attacked in his own home. The killer is methodical, careful. This is not a crime of passion. It is planned. He is killed, we don't know how. Strangled, perhaps, or struck from behind. Then comes the horror, the dismemberment, the removal of every identifying feature. The head, gone. The hands, gone. The legs, gone. The killer wraps the torso in layers, oilskin, sacking, cord. He drives to the Severn, perhaps in the dead of night. He throws the bundle from a bridge, or wades into the shallows to place it in the current. He believes the river will carry it to the sea, that it will never be found, that even if it is, it will be unidentifiable. He is almost right. But the river keeps its own counsel. It delivers the torso to George Wilkins' fishing nets, and so the man with the manicured toes enters public consciousness, not as a person, but as a puzzle. We cannot know his name. But we know this. He lived. He had habits and quirks. He cared for his feet, perhaps took pride in small acts of grooming. He was methodical in his own way. Someone, somewhere, loved him. A mother, perhaps, who never knew what became of her son. A partner who could never report him missing for fear of exposure. He deserved to be mourned by name. He was denied that. But he is not forgotten. And what of the killers? Those who walked away from their crimes and lived on. Did they ever feel remorse? Or did they sleep soundly, their secrets buried with their victims? The statistical likelihood is that both killers are dead. The lady in the tree was murdered over 80 years ago. Her killer, if he was 30 in 1935, would be nearly 120 now. The Severn torso killer, if he was 40 in 1960, would be over 100. They are gone, and they took their secrets with them. But did they live easy lives? Research on killers who evade capture is limited, for obvious reasons. But studies of those who were eventually caught suggest a range of responses. Some feel crushing guilt. They confess decades later, unable to live with the weight. In 2008, a man in his 80s walked into a police station in Manchester and confessed to a murder he'd committed in 1953. He said he couldn't die without telling the truth. Others rationalize. They convince themselves the victim deserved it, or that circumstances forced their hand. The murder becomes, in their minds, justified, and some feel nothing. Psychopathy is rare, only about 1% of the population, but it exists. For these individuals, the victim was an object, a problem to be solved. There is no guilt because there is no empathy. Did the man from Liverpool ever return to Coed y Brain? Did he drive past the tree and feel a thrill of fear or of triumph? Did he follow the newspaper reports of the discovery, his heart racing, waiting for the knock on the door that never came? Did the Severn torso killer watch the press coverage, the speculation about the manicured toes, and laugh at how close the police came without ever finding him? We want to believe they suffered, that justice, even cosmic justice, caught up to them, that they died in pain, haunted by the faces of their victims. But the truth is likely more banal. They probably lived ordinary lives. They grew old. They died in their sleep, surrounded by families who never suspected. And that, perhaps, is the most disturbing thought of all. So where does that leave us? With 2 graves marked unknown, and questions that echo across decades. But perhaps, in asking those questions, we give these victims something they were denied, and so we are left with these echoes. The wind in the hollow of a Welsh oak still carries a murmur. The gray waters of the Severn still hold a secret in their depths. These stories are more than just unsolved crimes. They are conversations between the past and the present. They are the past asking a question we still strain to answer. They remind us that history is not a clean narrative. It is a collection of fragments, some of which are bones, some of which are whispers. The most enduring mysteries are not about finding a killer, but about understanding the profound silence they created. A silence that we, as storytellers, as the curious living, feel compelled to fill with our theories, our fears, and our endless haunting speculation. The files may be archived, but the stories are very much alive, and they will continue to be told, from the hollow of a tree to the bend of a river, for as long as we need to listen for ghosts. If you visit Wrexham today, you can see the stump of the great oak. It's cordoned off, protected as a historical site. A plaque tells the story in brief, sanitized terms. The woods are popular now with dog walkers and families. Children play nearby, unaware that beneath their feet, in the soil and the roots, particles of a woman's life might still remain. St. Mary's churchyard is peaceful. Her grave is in the older section, the stone weathered but readable. Someone, the church warden doesn't know who, leaves flowers regularly. Sometimes lilies, sometimes simple wildflowers. The River Severn flows on, as it has for millennia. At Stonebench, where the torso was found, there is no marker. The riverbank has changed, flood defenses built, paths paved. But the river remembers. In Gloucester, his grave is unmarked save for a small ground-level stone. Few visit. But the local historical society includes his story in their talks about unsolved mysteries of the area. These places hold the weight of their stories. They are ordinary locations transformed by tragedy into something more. Shrines, in a way, to the unknowable. What do these mysteries teach us? First, that justice is not guaranteed. We want to believe the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice, but for these victims, it did not. Their killers escaped. The system failed them. Second, that every life matters, even those society has forgotten. The effort to identify these victims, even decades later, is an affirmation that they deserve dignity in death, even if they were denied it in life. Third, that memory is a form of resistance against erasure. The lady in the tree and the Severn torso man were meant to disappear. Their killers tried to erase them. But we remember, and in remembering, we defeat that erasure. And finally, these stories remind us of our responsibility. We, the living, are the stewards of the dead stories. We must tell them truthfully, respectfully, and persistently, because silence is the killer's final victory. And we will not grant them that. The wind moves through the place where the oak once stood. It sounds, if you listen closely, almost like breathing. The Severn flows toward the sea, carrying its burdens and its secrets. 2 graves, 2 names that were never spoken, 2 lives that ended in darkness, but 2 stories that will never end. Because we will keep telling them. We will keep asking, who were you? What was your name? What happened to you? And perhaps, one day, the silence will break. The Dina will speak. The names will be found. Until then, we keep vigil. For the lady in the tree. For the man from the river. For all the lost and the forgotten and the silenced. The most enduring stories are those without an ending. And so, we continue to listen.